and welcome to this episode of Quake. Today we're going to be looking at leadings and giving ministry in meetings for worship. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How do we go about doing it? One of the big things, obviously, is how do we know that this is a true leading? How do we know that this is something coming from the inner light, or is it just our own imaginations? How do you know whether it's something just for us personally, or if it's something for us to share with the group? So we're going to delve right into it. We're going to look into how this works. It's one of the most fundamental parts of Quakerism, really, and a fundamental part of a meeting for worship. So I think it's really important that we understand it and that we talk about it, because I think, especially as a newcomer, you go in thinking you're expected to just be able to just go out and do it, and you feel like you've got nothing to fall back on. So I'm hoping that this will at least provide an opportunity for people to discuss what it's been like for them, how they've seen it, and take it from there. First off, I just wanted to say that in this video, I'm going to be using the phrase inward light. And for non-Quakers, that's going to be a very confusing phrase. I am wanting to do a video about inward light and what it is, and why I'm choosing to use that phrase instead of maybe others that people outside the Quaker community might be more familiar with. But that video is proving particularly hard and challenging to do. So that might take a while. In the meanwhile, I would probably refer you to two books, both by Rhiannon Grant, both part of the Quaker Quicks series, Hearing the Light and Telling the Truth About God. She's brilliant. She really goes into a lot of detail into Quaker theology from a liberal Quaker background, explaining the different words that people use when referring to God and what they mean by that as well. So in this video, I will be using inward light. That term in itself among some Quakers is controversial as well. As I said, I am putting a video together, but that is proving to be a mammoth task. So in true Quaker style, I think I'll start off with talking about my experience about going to Quaker meetings for worship for the first time and how that felt. Like many people probably coming to Quakerism, you kind of expect there to be, or at least maybe this is just me, I expected to go there and expected to have loads of things to say, and I would just go and I would just give wonderful ministry, and it would just come flowing out of me. And when I went and it didn't, and in fact ministry in the meeting was not very often, we might have maybe three pieces of ministry in the hour's meeting, I started to feel anxious, maybe that I wasn't doing it, I wasn't listening right, or I wasn't doing the meeting for worship right, because I couldn't really feel ever anything to say. And I think that was my first mistake. I was going into meeting trying to think of things to say, and I was talking in my mind and trying to think what could I say that expresses the feelings that I have. And that is the first mistake. It's not about you in these meetings. It's not about what I have to say. It's about listening. It's about listening and repeating what you have listened to rather than you as a person actively speaking. So the first time that I actually gave ministry was ages after I first went, once as I was starting to battle against these understandings of what Quaker meetings were. The first time that I did feel I did have something to share, I felt really anxious about it. I felt really anxious about doing it wrong, that saying it in the wrong way, using the language that people might feel uncomfortable with. My hands got really clammy, my heart started racing, and in the end, actually, I didn't say anything. I stayed silent. I felt very angry and disappointed with myself. It was really awful. I felt that I'd let the meeting down. I felt that I'd let myself down by having something which I truly felt had been given to me to share, and I kept it for myself. It was there were very strong negative feelings, and I wasn't expecting that at all. But I suppose at least I knew from that experience what what a leading from the inward lights looked like, so that hopefully next time that it came, I wouldn't let it slip. And so I think from then on, whenever I felt that feeling, so I got the clammy hands and I got my heart start was starting to race, and the phrases were starting to formulate in my mind. I didn't give myself any opportunity to back out or to overthink it. I just stood up and said whatever it was that was coming to me. I think I needed that mainly just to stop me getting in the way and trying to analyze what I had been given to share and actually just get out and share the message. And these leadings and giving ministry actually really gets to the heart of what a meeting for worship is. You know, this isn't a group of people meeting to think on great matters and share profound things with each other that they've thought about. Um, it's not a forum for people to uh, discuss ideas either. Ministry is literally where we are being guided by the inward light, where we're being given, uh, we're being given messages, we're being given leadings to guide us as humans, to guide us as a meeting, and it's so not about us. And I think that is the fundamental thing that we have to understand, that this is something breaking in and leading us as a worship group, or leading us as individuals. And it is an immense responsibility in a way. We should, you know, regardless of where of what on your relationship with the inward light is, if you've been given something to share, that should be considered very humbly and in absolutely no way to expand your own ego. You've been given something very precious and you have to deal with it very respectfully. And so I suppose we have to come to meeting with a certain amount of seriousness about what we're looking to do, and take that silence and that listening very seriously. I've talked to people who've said that they felt uncomfortable giving ministry because they didn't want to spoil the silence. They didn't want to. The silence was so powerful that they didn't actually want to disturb it. But I think we have to remember that the silence isn't what a meeting for worship is about. It is how we listen. We have to listen in silence, but we're not there to meet for silence. We're there to meet to worship, regardless of what you think of that term. We are there to come together with the inward light and to be led by it and to listen to what it's asking us to do. Um, if the inward light it has arrived, that is the purpose of the meeting. That is the purpose. We need to express ourselves. We need to express what's being said, because that is where the meeting is happening. It's not in the silence. It is in the ministry that we've been told to give. So I suppose what we might need to go into now is how to receive a leading. And actually, as I've said, nothing to do with you, not, but how do you put yourself maybe in the best mood or the best mindset to be able to receive a leading? Um, and I think that is important. I have done a video, and I would suggest you watch it, on meetings for worship and how what that's like. Um, and so I suppose this is more what I'm talking about. How do we put ourselves in the best position to listen to what the inward light is telling us? George Fox, one of the founders or early leaders of Quakerism, had this phrase of being still and cool, which I really like. The idea that you have to, as I said earlier, stop talking in your mind, something which I don't think, ever taught how to do. Right? I don't think in our modern society we're taught to turn our minds off very well, and it is very hard to do. But by being still and cool, you are not letting your mind take control of the conversation, not letting, and cool, I suppose, not letting your emotions take control of the situation. Doesn't mean that they're not there, but don't let them control the meeting. The meeting isn't about you, as I keep on saying. The quietest period of Quakerism, which was from the 1700s to 1800s, so 100 years or so, Took this maybe a step too far. They did sort of take on the idea that they didn't want to disturb the silence, that they didn't want to overstep their guide, I think is the quote that they used. Um, and to give ministry was essentially left to a certain group of people, whereas the others were supporting them in their silence, in their silent worship. I think we have to come with ourselves. We can't completely be void inside. There has to be something in us as well. We have to be engaging with the inward light actively with us ourselves, because that's what the inward light is responding to. It's responding to us. That's why if we've been given a leading, the leading's been given to us, not maybe the person next to us. It could very well have been, but there's a reason why it's been given to us to share, and it's because of our personalities, because of who we are, it's because of our backgrounds, and perhaps the way that we would interpret that leading and say it in a way that is meaningful for the group. So I think people find their own way. There's nothing wrong with reading um, in a meeting for worship, if you think that finds if you find that helpful. There could be a range of books that are available in the central table. In most Quaker meetings, there will be the Bible. There'll hopefully be other spiritual writings as well. There'll probably be Quaker Faith and Practice, which is a book of Quaker experiences. There might also be the weekly edition of The Friend, which is the British Quaker magazine. And so there's nothing wrong with bringing your own books as well, so long as the idea is that it's bringing you to something or somewhere. It's putting your mind in a certain state to be ready to receive leadings. You're in meeting for worship, and you think that you've received a leading. What do you do then? Or you start, as I said, my physical signs of heart racing and clammy hands, you might not get that at all. That might just be me. So how do you know? What is this leading? What am I to do with it? Is it a leading at all? Hugh Barber came up with 4 points, 4 tests of what an actual leading is, which I'll look into now. A note on this, though, I do not mean that sort of systematically testing our leadings like this every time. If you think that your leading is good and you're raring to go, then that's obviously what you're meant to do, so do it. I think sometimes this helps maybe the overthinker, who might think, well, my mind is there's a lot going on in there. I need to make sure that what's going on, if that's a leading, that I know what that is, as compared to just me mind speaking all the time. So the first test is this a meeting for you? Sorry, is this a leading for you, or is this a leading for the group? And I think people tend to downplay that. And if it's not vocal ministry for the group, then it's sort of second best. But I don't think that's true. I think some of the most profound leadings that I have been just for me. When the inward light has spoken to me directly, they've been very powerful. I don't think in any way that they're any less powerful than ministry that I've given to the meeting. But it is definitely a leading just for me. It's given in words maybe that only I would understand, or maybe it's about something that only I have experienced. Um, and so sharing that would not really be of benefit to the whole group necessarily, because I'd have to go into a whole backstory as to what this was about and sort of an inner dialogue, which wouldn't be what the meeting is about. The second test is this a leading for others? And I suppose this can take on two forms. Sometimes it hasn't happened to me, but I know it has happened. People receive leadings for another person in particular in the meeting, or perhaps not in the meeting, but I'm looking at in the meeting for this example. I would say that's probably not something to share with that person in the meeting necessarily, unless you feel that it is. I think generally in a meeting, people shouldn't be singled out. If you've been given a leading about the person sitting next to you, maybe talk to them about that afterwards. But I think um, a leading, I think generally it shouldn't be about you necessarily. The relevance should be for the whole group and not just for one person, either yourself or another person in the group. Um, So I think, is it a leading for others? You wanting to think, is this something which is pertinent to the community, to the whole world? Is this something that you think, or that is really important to the group as a body? That might be something more to share. His third test is consistency. And I think for liberal Quakers, that's a hard one because more conservative Quakers or evangelical Quakers have quite a central authority in the Bible, and they would say, okay, is this a leading which is consistent the uh, with the Bible? Yes or no? No, probably not a leading, probably not of the inward light, not going to share. Yes, then I will share. But for liberal Quakers, many of whom may appreciate the Bible, but may not necessarily believe it to have any greater authority than any other text, where do those liberal Quakers go for their authority? And I suppose that's going to come up in the fourth test, probably most of all. But I think you just know. I think with that one, you know if it's in line with the Quaker testimonies, simplicity, truth, equality, peace. If it's in line with those, if it's in line with perhaps other leadings in the meeting, you're probably on the right lines. So here we go to the fourth test then, and as I said, I think this is where many liberal Quakers probably find very helpful, and that is, how patient have you been with this leading? Uh, and I know that goes against necessarily something that I said earlier when I said just don't think about it too much, just say it. But hear me out. Um, I have never really had in any leading, it has never come out in a whole sentence or a couple of sentences of things to say. I've never been given word for word what I need to say to people. It has been an image. It has been maybe a word or maybe a phrase, but nothing really substantial. And what I understand from patience with that is um, sit with it a while and let it form, let it come to the fore, let it take shape. Um, and I think that is very helpful because then actually by doing so, sometimes you may have be seeing links, maybe with something that someone else has said in meeting, or maybe something else that has come into your mind whilst you've been waiting. Um, and it kind of comes all together into a leading. It's very strange how it happens, but I think sort of ruminating on it like that, being patient with it and thinking, right, is this what I mean, can be really helpful. Sometimes it's not, and it can lead to people, especially people who are anxious, thinking, oh gosh, I'm not going to talk about that. But I think with time, I think that's been a very helpful approach in thinking, is this something, let me think about it some more. Is there any other building, are there any other building blocks from the meeting which I can use in order to make it um, a leading that I can share? Right, so you know it's a leading. You've done the four tests or the three tests or however many tests you want to do, or maybe you just decided just to go for it and you're sure, and then what do you do? Unfortunately, the only way you have to do it is to stand up in meeting. That's how you do it, which might terrify some people, the idea of standing up and saying things. Um, but that's the way you do it. So we've in our meeting at the moment, because we're having a blended meeting for COVID reasons, we have a microphone in the center of the table, so we have to approach the table. That's not any that's not for any ceremonial reason or anything like that. It's just because that's where the microphone is, so that's where we go. Um, People tend to address the meeting as a whole by starting with friends or dear friends, or something along those lines. Um, but I suppose once you're up and you're giving your leading, do take your time with it. I think that's probably the biggest advice, especially if you're feeling all these emotions. Take your time with it. Um, I think there is. I think it does sort of become stereotypical in a way of someone who's giving a leading to the group, giving ministry, is that they do speak very slowly. There are lots of pauses, because potentially they could be just putting their thoughts together in a sense, in a way that makes sense. But I think also maybe just for nerves, it's just good to take your time with it. And I don't mean by that stay up for as long as possible or elaborate or expand beyond further than you think that you need to. What I mean is take your time to make sure that your message is delivered clearly and succinctly and patiently as well. Are there any faux pas then? So, are there anything is there anything in worship which, or in giving a ministry, that you shouldn't do? Friends have existed for nearly 400 years, and they have no rules necessarily in terms of ministry. There are no rules. You can minister however you want, but like with anything that's lasted that long, certain patterns have developed. These aren't rules, but there may be things which you realize pretty quickly as a Quaker how to do these things. But back in the good old days, when meetings for worship lasted at most of the day, I think there were some uh, early ones which were said to last for over 9 hours. Whole sermons were given by people. It wasn't just a leading a couple of sentences like that. It could be going on for ages. But since obviously nowadays that meetings have reduced in time to for good or ill, um, so to have the length of the leadings also reduced, so that now, as I said, a leading, it would be unusual, I'd say, for a leading to be any longer than 5-10 minutes. I think that would be considered quite a long one. So, but as I said, it's not wrong. It would just be maybe unusual. You've got to think that if the ministry is for the group, there has to be a good enough time for people to include that in their in their waiting worship, to include that and to think about what that might mean for the group, for themselves. And if you spend the whole meeting talking, where's that time for reflection going to happen? And that then fits on very nicely with another one, which is about uh, giving ministry its time as well. So for that, it would probably be quite unusual to for people to give ministry straight away. I'm using the word unusual on purpose. It's not wrong. If that's what's happened, that's what's happened. But generally, I think you'd find that people don't tend to give ministry probably around for about at least 10-15 minutes into the meeting. Um, but I think the idea behind it would be that you want to make sure that you're giving time and that patience to your reflections, to your leadings, to make sure that what you're being led to do is accurate. Similarly, on the other end of the meeting, for that reflection as well, the last 10-15 minutes or so tends not to be, people don't tend to give ministry. Again, they can, but if we're thinking that the meeting needs to incorporate that into their worship, think about and reflect on what's been shared with the group, if they've only got 5 minutes or 2 minutes to do that, how how are they going to do that? Maybe a controversial one, and one that I'm not really sure that I believe. I've seen it read that it's not the done thing for ministry to relate, or ministries to relate to each other in a meeting. So if so and so has a leading about this, and then so and so also sort of has a leading about this, that's considered wrong. I don't agree with that. That maybe I've misunderstood it. But I think it would be very powerful and a sign of a very strong leading for the whole group if the whole um, meeting, or if multiple people in the meeting have very similar leadings that are about something which they feel led to share with everyone. I think that's very good. I suppose maybe what they mean is that it's not um, you're not just repeating what the person next to you said, or um, you're not just adding your own personal point onto something that they've said. You're certainly not using that as an opportunity to engage in a debate or anything like that. So maybe that's what's being talked about there. But I certainly think if a leading is coming together from something else, or is linked in some way to another, from another piece of ministry, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I've also heard people talking about whether or not ministry and meeting should always be positive, or whether it could be reproachful as well. Um, and I think it should be reproachful, not all the time, but I think sometimes we do need to be pushed into action, so to speak, and sometimes by reproaching ourselves or reproaching the groups, that could be the best way to do it. It has to be tactfully done, and perhaps that leading has been shared with you because you're a person that could do that tactfully. But there are loads of things which Quakers really want to get involved in terms of justice and peace and social action. And but we are human, and sometimes we fall short. And so I think maybe have I think a um, reproachful leading and ministry would help to galvanize the group, and I think therefore that is certainly something that should be shared with the group. In so Howard Brinton, who I want to do a video about as well because he's amazing. He had a phrase where meeting for worship is not about exposure to darkness, but exposure to the inward light which overcomes the darkness. So you can talk about injustices, you can talk about the tragedies that exist in the real world, um, but that is coming out of you through the words of the inward light to, as I said, galvanize to action, to um, respond to that of God, which is a very well used Quaker phrase in in all people who might be suffering. And so I think yes, you can bring something negative or reproachful to as a leading, but the idea is that that is coming from the inward light that uh, wants us to do something about it, wants us to share our love and compassion with the world. Similarly, similarly, not similarly at all, actually. Another faux pas would probably be how many times you give ministry. I think it would be fair to say it would be very strange for anyone to give ministry more than once. And this isn't because, we're not trying to hinder anyone there. I think it probably goes back to that idea of patience. If you've sat with your thoughts and you're listening to um, what the inward light is telling you, you your leading should be, or your ministry at least, should be the fulfillment of what has been shared with you. It would be a bit strange to think, oh, and then the inward light thinks, oh, well, yeah, sorry, you forgot to mention that bit. Could you just go up and say that again? It's not. It doesn't work like that. It's got to be. Uh, I think that's why patience is important, so that your ministry is succinct, but also as full and and accurate and loyal portrayal of the leading that you've been given. An interesting faux pas, and I think could be a whole thing on this, is about preparing a leading. And what I mean by that is writing down something. You might feel really inspired by it, um, but maybe writing down something that you think is a leading from the inward lights, writing it down, and then bringing it into worship later. And I get why people bristle about that, because they would say, well, if the inward light can come to us at any time, we meet on a Sunday just because that's convenient, but the inward light is permanently there and permanently speaking to us if we listen. What's wrong with, if I don't know, you're alone and you have this leading and you write it down and you share it with the group on the Sunday? What's wrong with that? It would be a pretty strange experience if this entity, this inward light, only spoke to you on a Sunday. That'd be a bit odd. So there is a focus on extemporaneous or spontaneous ministry amongst liberal Quakers. Certainly, there are um, pastoral Quakers with pastors who do sermons much like uh, other churches, but with liberal Quakers, the focus is always on the extemporaneous. And there was a really interesting article, actually, I can't remember who wrote it now, who was linking Quakers and extemporaneous worship and Pentecostals and speaking in tongues. And the link is that if it's extemporaneous, it's more likely to be from the inward light. Whereas um, if it's written down, there is just more chance that it's been corrupted by your own thoughts. Obviously, maybe then when you try to give that ministry, maybe you don't feel the way that the leading had originally made you feel, and so it's of less value. Don't know what I feel about this. I think I'd happy to hear what your thoughts are as well. I mean, on the one hand, I get it. We want it to be as authentic as possible. That's why we're doing it. But I think if someone has really had a very strong encounter or leading over the week and they want to share it, I would, I suppose, like to know. On the other hand, I suppose also it's probably more likely if the inward light has given you a leading alone, there's probably a reason for that. And it's probably because it's something for you rather than for the group. If we think that all of us are coming together and through our communal worship, the inward light um, is leading us, then if that leading is chosen to be given when you're by yourself, it's probably just for you. So that maybe that one might be why it's not it's frowned upon amongst liberal Quakers. So how do we promote good ministry, or how can we make ourselves the best we can possibly be so that we receive and know what to do with the leadings that we're given? We all want to have good quality leadings. We all want to have a good relationship with the inward light. We want to be able to share that and to bless our community and be able to go forward as a group together under the guidance of the inward light. But how can we do that effectively? I suppose that's something that's really important to think about. Um, I think the first thing would be maybe try some Quaker devotional texts. They exist. I was very surprised, but there are quite a good few. Um, the Probably the most famous, and I've read it and it is phenomenal, is A Testament to Devotion by Thomas Kelly. And despite what I've said earlier, I would always try and keep your mind focused on the inward light throughout the week. Maybe through silent worship by yourself, or maybe through prayer. Just meaning that you are practicing that idea of connecting with the inward light, and you're not and it's not just something you do once a week. It's like with anything, you're sort of training your spiritual side to foster that connection with the inward light. And lastly, I think my advice would probably be just live life to its fullest. That's what the inward light wants for you. It wants you to be fully alive. And if you're fully alive, it will resonate with you even more. And it will mean that you are living your life in accordance to to its leadings. Therefore, you'll be more attuned to listening out to future leadings as well. So I've been spending a lot of time, obviously, in this video talking about leadings and giving ministry, vocal ministry. But I think it's really important also to think about, okay, what happens if there is no vocal ministry in a meeting? Was that a bad meeting then? It does happen. It does happen. There can be a period of time when there is no vocal ministry in over a couple of meetings. That does happen. But does that mean that we've gathered incorrectly, or it can make people think, oh, well, so and so wasn't there and so wasn't there. So, of course, there's not going to be any vocal ministry because they're the ones always give vocal ministry. So, firstly, going back to Barber's tests, just because there was no vocal ministry obviously doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of ministry going on for amongst the individuals. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be shared. Secondly, as I've been saying in this video as well, is that the leadings aren't about for us. It's not a performance. You know, we're waiting on the inward light to give us leadings, but this isn't something that we're doing ourselves. It's not wonderful and profound thoughts that we've had. It's about listening to the leading. It's not a performance. So if there is no vocal ministry, it's not, oh well, we're not doing a very good job then. It's just not happened on that Sunday. I suppose going on from that, this is why I'm not necessarily too keen when people are meeting afterwards, they thank people for their ministry, just because I think it does put a sense of ownership on that ministry when the ministry, just because if I've given it, so and so next to me could very well have done it as well. It's been given to me, and that's all very well and good, but it's not about me, and so I don't need to be thanked for it. At the same time, I suppose maybe we're thankful to have the members of the group who have been led to speak because Inward Light has chosen them to speak, and so therefore, by having them in the meeting, we're being nourished by that leading. And similarly, it could be very true on the other end of the spectrum. A bad meeting could also be one where there is continuous vocal ministry and there's no time for reflection, there's no time to center down, there's no time to reflect on what's being said. So I think lots of people do worry about not giving ministry and that they haven't been given something to lead. And as I said, they do worry that, what does this mean for me? Have I not done a good job? Um, but as I've said, it's out of your control, really. Um, it's, if you haven't been given the leading, it means absolutely nothing about your relationship um, with the inward light. But I mean, it's it's also true that by listening to the ministry of others, that your relationship with the inward light is expanding anyway. So it's not just because you haven't given had the leading or you haven't given the ministry doesn't in any way mean that you are not being nourished, as I've said, by the ministry of others. Similarly, if you have had maybe a flurry of ministries, and you feel that you've got a really good relationship going with the inward light at the moment, but then it goes, you have a period of dryness, I think it's called. Don't be disheartened either, but still come to Quaker meetings anyway. It's not because as I said, as I keep saying, it's not about you. Um, in the advices and queries in the Quaker Faith and Practice, there's a really good one, number 10, which goes like this. It says, come regularly to meeting for worship, even when you are angry, depressed, tired, or spiritually cold. So there we go. In the silence, ask for and accept the prayerful support of others joined with you in worship. Try to find a spiritual wholeness which encompasses suffering as well as thankfulness and joy. Prayer, springing from a deep place in the heart, may bring healing and unity as nothing else can. Let meeting for worship nourish your whole life. Which I think is, well, very powerful as an advice, but also does come to that idea as you don't have to be right. You don't have to be feeling good. You don't have to be feeling spiritually connected in any way in order to attend and to still have that connection with the inward light, which you do have, even if you haven't necessarily been given a leading. And I think worst of all, as I've mentioned earlier, don't shut out a leading just because you're afraid to speak for whatever reason. The inward light has chosen you to give it this to deliver the message, and wouldn't have chosen you if there was any way that you'd be unable to deliver it. So trust in that leading as well. Have great faith in that leading that has been given to you, and stand up and speak. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up button and do check out some of my other videos about Quakerism in the UK. If you want to keep up to date with the latest videos, please do remember to subscribe as well. It really helps. Thank you.